Dr. Bills here, and we are covering the Mary Shelley book, Frankenstein, but instead of reading the actual book, in order to save time, my students are doing an abbreviated study, unit study on Frankenstein prior to us beginning our unit on Beowulf. And so you should have the Sparknotes Frankenstein Mary Shelley in front of you, the one that has the study guides, the glossary of literary terms, the study questions, review, all that good stuff, and it looks like this. This should be in front of you. Now, how are we going to use this book? We are only going to be reading each summary. Now, we will not be reading the analysis of each chapter, but we will be reading each chapter summary. So if you have your book in front of you, we are going to begin on page 21. That's where chapter 1, the summary, begins. So turn to page 21. And again, we are only reading the chapters, the chapter summary. We are not reading the analysis. So as soon as I finish reading chapter 1 and chapter 2 summary, we're going to skip over to page 24 that begins the chapter 3 summary. So let's begin on chapter 1, page 21. Chapter 1, page 21 of Frankenstein in the Sparknotes by Mary Shelley. The stranger, who the reader soon learns is Victor Frankenstein, begins his narration. He starts with his family background, birth, and early childhood, telling Walton about his father, Alphonse, and his mother, Caroline. Alphonse became Caroline's protector when her father, Alphonse's longtime friend Buford, died in poverty. They married 2 years later, and Victor was born soon after. Frankenstein then describes how his childhood companion, Elizabeth Lavenza, entered his family. At this point in the narrative, the original 1818 and revised 1831 versions of Frankenstein diverge. In the original version, Elizabeth is Victor's cousin, the daughter of Alphonse's sister. When Victor is 4 years old, Elizabeth's mother dies, and Elizabeth is adopted into the Frankenstein family. In the revised version, Elizabeth is discovered by Caroline on a trip to Italy when Victor is about 5 years old. While visiting a poor Italian family, Caroline notices a beautiful blonde girl among the dark-haired Italian children. Upon discovering that Elizabeth is the orphaned daughter of a Milanese nobleman and a German woman, and that the Italian family can barely afford to feed her, Caroline adopts Elizabeth and brings her back to Geneva. Victor's mother decides at the moment of the adoption that Elizabeth and Victor should someday marry. Chapter 2. Elizabeth and Victor grow up together as best friends. Victor's friendship with Henry Clerval, a schoolmate and only child, flourishes as well, and he spends his childhood happily surrounded by his close domestic circle. As a teenager, Victor becomes increasingly fascinated by the mysteries of the natural world. He chances upon a book by Cornelius Agrippa, a 16th century scholar of the occult sciences, and becomes interested in natural philosophy. He studies the outdated findings of the alchemist Agrippa, Paracelsus, and Albertus Magnus with enthusiasm. He witnesses the destructive power of nature when, during a raging storm, lightning destroys a tree near his house. A modern natural philosopher accompanying the Frankenstein family explains to Victor the workings of electricity, making the idea of the alchemist seem outdated and worthless. In the 1818 version, a demonstration of electricity by his father convinces Victor of the alchemist's mistakenness. Chapter 3. At the age of 17, Victor leaves his family in Geneva to attend the university at Ingolstadt. Just before Victor departs, his mother catches scarlet fever from Elizabeth, whom she has been nursing back to health, and dies. On her deathbed, she begs Elizabeth and Victor to marry. Several weeks later, still grieving, Victor goes off to Ingolstadt. Arriving at the university, he finds quarters in the town and sets up a meeting with the professor of natural philosophy, M. Krimp. Krimp tells Victor that all the time that Victor has spent studying the alchemist has been wasted, further souring Victor on the study of natural philosophy. He then attends a lecture in chemistry by the professor named Waldman. This lecture, along with a subsequent meeting with the professor, convinces Victor to pursue his studies in the sciences. Chapter 4. Victor attacks his studies with enthusiasm, and ignoring his social life, his family far away in Geneva, makes rapid progress. Fascinated by the mystery of the creation of life, he begins to study how the human body is built, anatomy, and how it falls apart, death and decay. After several years of tireless work, he masters all that his professors have to teach him, and he goes one step further, discovering the secret of life. Privately, hidden away in his apartment where no one can see him work, he decides to begin the construction of an animate creature, envisioning the creation of a new race of wonderful beings. Zealously devoting himself to this labor, he neglects everything else: family, friends, studies, and social life, and grows increasingly pale, lonely, and obsessed. Chapter 5. One stormy night, after months of labor, Victor completes his creation. But when he brings it to life, its awful appearance horrifies him. He rushes to the next room and tries to sleep, but he is troubled by nightmares about Elizabeth and his mother's corpse. He wakes to discover the monster looming over his bed with a grotesque smile and rushes out of the house. He spends the night pacing in his courtyard. The next morning, he goes walking in the town of Ingolstadt, frantically avoiding a return to his now haunted apartment. As he walks by the town inn, Victor comes across his friend, Henry Clerval, who has just arrived to begin studying at the university. Delighted to see Henry, a breath of fresh air, and a reminder of his family after so many months of isolation and ill health, he brings him back to his apartment. Victor enters first and is relieved to find no sign of the monster. But, weakened by months of work and shock at the horrific being he has created, he immediately falls ill with a nervous fever that lasts several months. Henry nurses him back to health, and when Victor has recovered, gives him a letter from Elizabeth that had arrived during his illness. Chapter 6. Elizabeth's letter expresses her concern about Victor's illness and entreats him to write to his family in Geneva as soon as he can. She also tells him that Justine Moritz, a girl who used to live with the Frankenstein family, has returned to their house following her mother's death. After Victor has recovered, he introduces Henry, who is studying Oriental languages, to the professors at the university. The task is painful, however, since the sight of any chemical instrument worsens Victor's symptoms. Even speaking to his professors torments him. He decides to return to Geneva and await a letter from his father, specifically specifying the date of his departure. Meanwhile, he and Henry take a walk around through the country, uplifting their spirits with the beauties of nature. Chapter 7. On their return to the university, Victor finds a letter from his father telling him that Victor's younger brother, William, has been murdered. Saddened, shocked, and apprehensive, Victor departs immediately for Geneva. By the time he arrives, night has fallen, and the gates of Geneva have been shut. So he spends the evening walking in the woods around the outskirts of town. As he walks near the spot where his brother's body was found, he spies the monster lurking and becomes convinced that his creation is responsible for killing William. The next day, however, when he returns home, Victor learns that Justine has been accused of the murder. After the discovery of the body, a servant had found in Justine's pocket a picture of Caroline Frankenstein last seen in William's possession. Victor proclaims Justine's innocence, but the evidence against her seems irrefutable, and Victor refuses to explain himself for fear that he will be labeled insane. Chapter 8. Justine confesses to the crime, believing that she will thereby gain salvation, but tells Elizabeth and Victor that she is innocent and miserable. They remain convinced of her innocence, but Justine is soon executed. Victor becomes consumed with guilt, knowing the monster he created and the cloak of secrecy within which the creation took place have now caused the deaths of 2 members of his family. Chapter 9. After Justine's execution, Victor becomes increasingly melancholy. He considers suicide, but restrains himself by thinking of Elizabeth and his father. Alphonse, hoping to cheer up his son, takes his children on an excursion to the family home in Bellerive. From there, Victor wanders alone toward the valley of Chamonix. The beautiful scenery cheers him somewhat, but his respite from grief is short-lived. Chapter 10. One rainy day, Victor wakes to find his old feelings of despair resurfacing. He decides to travel to the summit of Montanvert, hoping that the view of the pure, eternal, beautiful, natural scene will revive his spirits. When he reaches the glacier at the top, he is momentarily consoled by the sublime spectacle. As he crosses to the opposite side of the glacier, however, he spots a creature loping toward him at incredible speed. At closer range, he recognizes clearly the grotesque shape of the monster. He issues futile threats of attack to the monster, whose enormous strength and speed allow him to elude Victor easily. Victor curses him and tells him to go away, but the monster, speaking eloquently, persuades him to accompany him to a fire in the cave of ice. Inside the cave, the monster begins to narrate the events of his life. Chapter 11. Sitting by the fire in his hut, the monster tells Victor of the confusion that he experienced upon being created. He describes his flight from Victor's apartment into the wilderness and his gradual acclimation to the world through his discovery of the sensations of light, dark, hunger, thirst, and cold. According to his story, one day he finds a fire and is pleased at the warmth it creates, but he becomes dismayed when he burns himself on the hot embers. He realizes that he can keep the fire alive by adding wood, and that the fire is good not only for heat and warmth, but also for making food more palatable. In search of food, the monster finds a hut and enters it. His presence causes an old man inside to shriek and run away in fear. The monster proceeds to a village where more people flee at the sight of him. As a result of these incidents, he resolves to stay away from humans. One night, he takes refuge in a small hovel adjacent to a cottage. In the morning, he discovers that he can see into the cottage through a crack in the wall and observes that the occupants are a young man, a young woman, and an old man. Chapter 12. Observing his neighbors for an extended period of time, the monster notices that they often seem unhappy. Though he is unsure why, he eventually realizes, however, that their despair results from their poverty, to which he has been contributing by surreptitiously stealing their food. Torn by his guilty conscience, he stops stealing their food and does what he can to reduce their hardship, gathering wood at night to leave at the door for their use. The monster becomes aware that his neighbors are able to communicate with each other using strange sounds. Vowing to learn their language, he tries to match the sound they make with the actions they perform. He acquires a basic knowledge of the language, including the names of the young man and woman, Felix and Agatha. He admires their graceful form and is shocked by his ugliness when he catches a sight of his reflection in a pool of water. He spends the whole winter in the hovel, unobserved and well protected from the elements, and grows increasingly affectionate towards his unwitting hosts. That concludes our reading of chapters 1 through chapter 12 of Frankenstein in the Sports Notes, Frankenstein by Mary Shelley.